Are there any good documentaries about art?
There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of documentaries about art and artists. One of the best recent documentaries is Simon Sharma's Power of Art, 2006, series, which does an excellent, and very entertaining job of explaining the work of famous artists throughout history from the Renaissance to the 20th century. The PBS series Art, 21 is unparalleled in its presentation of art in the 21st century. Each episode of Art, 21, which is organized by theme, provides a look into the minds, and usually the studios, of artists working today. For a mix of Western and non-Western art, the series Art Through Time. A global view is also presented thematically, and includes information from art historians from around the world. It is often shown on local PBS stations. Check your local listings.
What innovations were made by Euphronius?
Active in Athens between 520 and 470 BCE, Euphronius was a vase painter who worked in the red figure style. The red figure style of ancient Greek vase painting developed after the black figure style used by artists such as Exekias. Euphronius' work demonstrates a masterful ability to use the red figure technique to naturalistically depict the human form in multiple poses. Euphronius signed 18 of his vases, sometimes as a painter, and sometimes as the potter. One of his most famous works is a bowl-like calyx crater depicting the death of Sarpedon. c. 515 BCE. The story comes from Homer's Iliad and the painting shows the deities Hypnos and then Ados, gods of sleep and death, respectively, carrying the dead body of the warrior Sarpedon. Hermes, the messenger god, holds a staff decorated with snakes called a caduceus, and wears a winged hat. Hermes watches over the scene and ensures the safe arrival of Sarpedon's body in the underworld. The figures in the dignified and detailed scene were rendered using foreshortening, an innovative technique in which body forms are distorted so that they appear to recede from the viewer, which creates 48 a sense of real space in the painting.
What is the Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde?
The Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde in Colorado was built by the Anasazi people, who lived in the Four Corners area of the American Southwest for thousands of years, and are considered ancestors of the Pueblo people. Before the 14th century, the area was less arid and slightly cooler than it is now, and the Anasazi lived by irrigating the land for farming. They built dwellings in natural cliff alcoves, directly underneath the land they farmed. The dwellings, which are among the most dramatic and best preserved examples of Native American architecture, were designed for special purposes such as food storage and religious ritual. Some of the dwellings have as many as 150 rooms and are essentially cave villages. Another structure, Pueblo Bonito, was also built by ancestral Pueblo people as early as the 9th century.
Who is Cindy Sherman?
Cindy Sherman, 1954, is a postmodern photographer known for her conceptual manipulations of media images and her use of self-portraiture. Sherman's photographs explore feminine identity and question the way women are portrayed in art and popular culture. In her series Untitled Film Stills, from the late 1970s and early 1980s, Sherman takes on the role of a female icon, a blonde bombshell such as Marilyn Monroe, and other stereotypical clichés. Her characters range from self-aware to subdued to comical. Her later work takes on art history. In Untitled number 224, Sherman becomes Bacchus, the ancient god of wine as imagined in the work of Baroque artist Caravaggio. Her eyes peering out from under a crown of grape leaves. Through her work, Cindy Sherman becomes the composite of the many images and film references she makes, leading the viewer to question the reality or artificiality of not only the artist's identity, but of the way in which subjects are portrayed in art and popular culture.
What is gouache?
Gouache, which rhymes with squash, is a type of opaque watercolor, also known as body color. The opacity of gouache is the result of the addition of glue and white pigment.
Who was Vermeer?
Known for his genre paintings and landscapes, Johannes Vermeer. 1632 to 1675, painted hushed, yet captivating works such as The Girl with the Pearl Earring. 1665, The Geographer, 1668 to 1669, and The Kitchen Maid, 1660. His landscapes, such as A View of Delft, 1662, are meticulously painted, highly detailed, and brightly colored. Many of his paintings include individual women, seemingly alone in their thoughts. His 1657 oil painting, Girl Reading a Letter by an Open Window, is a quiet work in which a young girl's interior thoughts appear infiltrated by the outside world. Through both the act of reading and the light streaming in from the large window, Vermeer's brush strokes are nearly invisible, creating a porcelain smooth texture in his work. Gombrich writes in The Story of Art that Vermeer's paintings are really still lives with human beings, Gombrich 433.
What are Siehi's 6 canons?
He was a painter and scholar from the late 5th century, who is known for establishing 6 laws or canons of painting. These 6 canons go a long way in explaining the underlying philosophy of Chinese painting. There is ongoing debate as to the exact translation of each of the canons. But according to James Cahill, author of the 6 Laws and How to Read Them, they are as follows: engender a sense of movement through spirit consonance. Use the brush with the bone method. Responding to things, depict their forms. According to kind, describe appearances with color. Dividing and planning, positioning and arranging. Transmitting and conveying earlier models through copying and transcribing. See Kleiner 57. While difficult to understand, Siehi's principles of painting tell art historians a great deal about what was important to early Chinese painters. The first principle suggests a strong connection between art making and spirituality. The goal was to capture the spontaneity and intangible spirit quality of the subject being depicted. The latter principles are slightly more straightforward, and refer to technical skills. Siehi explains how to hold the paintbrush, encourages naturalism, and emphasizes skill development through copying and practice.
What is jasperware?
Developed by the English potter Josiah Wedgwood, jasperware is a type of porcelain best known for its popular white on blue unglazed finish, though various other colors were also used, and neoclassical design. Wedgwood hired sculptor John Flaxman to recreate highly popular molded relief images that closely mimicked ancient Greek vase designs, which had been recently discovered. Jasperware was effectively marketed and manufactured on a large scale, making Wedgwood's neoclassical designs available to a wider public than decorative objects made before the Industrial Revolution. Jasperware, and Wedgwood pottery as a whole, remain very popular to this day.
What is Aegean art?
The term Aegean art refers to the art of 3 major Mediterranean cultures which predate ancient Greece: the Cycladic culture, the Minoans, and the Mycenaeans. Together, these groups are referred to as the Aegean civilization and flourished during the Bronze Age. c. 3000 to 1200 BCE. The Cycladic culture established itself on a group of small islands known as the Cyclades, while the Minoans lived on the island of Crete. The later Mycenaeans were based on mainland Greece. Aegean art is quite enigmatic and is characterized by lively sculptures and wall paintings which mirror the natural world and the warmth of the Mediterranean.
What are the major periods of Mesoamerican art?
Mesoamerican art, art of Mexico and Central America. is divided into three main categories: the pre-classic period, c. 1200 B.C.E.300 CE classic period, c. 300 to 950 post-classic period. c. 950-1521 The post-classic period ended quite suddenly when the major indigenous empires of the Americas fell to the Spanish conquistadores led by Hernán Cortés.
What do the Yoruba consider beautiful?
To make a beautiful work of art in the Yoruba tradition is a complex task, with many aesthetic requirements and a long tradition of art criticism. The Yoruba are known for their multifaceted approach to beauty, in which morality of the artist affects the aesthetic value of the work they create. They value both the inner and exterior concept of self. And at the core of this value is the idea of iwalava, which means, character is beauty or, nature is beauty. The work of art itself, for example a figurative sculpture, must also possess specific qualities, including the following: balance between realism and abstraction. For example, a sculpture should not be too real, nor too abstract, clearly defined linear forms, smooth, delicate surfaces, and slightly rounded features pleasing. Proportion and dignified symmetry, youthful liveliness balanced with calm maturity. An example of the Yoruba aesthetic can be seen in a 13-inch copper sculpture from the 13th to 14th centuries. This sculpture depicts a stoic, seated male figure, and though it is now damaged, the figure's forearms are missing and there is some damage in the legs. The work displays skillful naturalism, individualized detail, smooth features, and appropriate size and proportion. It is possible that the seated figure was ritualistically adorned with the clothes and ornaments of a Yoruba leader and is associated with Yoruba themes of honor and respect. Yoruba society remains one of the largest in Africa, with a population of about 35 million in Nigeria alone, as well as other African countries, the Caribbean, and the United States. The Yoruba aesthetic continues to be an important element in Yoruba art production and function, to this day.
Who is Aiwai?
Aiwai, 1957, is a Chinese contemporary artist and political activist known for working in a variety of media, including painting, sculpture, and installations. Wei, who has shown his work internationally, was arrested by Chinese police in 2011 and detained for tax evasion, and has since not been allowed to leave the country or speak publicly about his arrest. Aiwai's work is often political, contemplative, and humorous. Many of his works, such as his Colored Vases, 2006, series, evoke a sense of emptiness.
Who was Rembrandt?
Rembrandt van Rijn, 1606–1669, was a Dutch painter known for his expressive paintings and prints, including portraits, landscapes, and both mythological and biblical scenes. His paintings often rely on dramatic chiaroscuro, which highlights the faces of his figures against dark, sometimes nearly black, backgrounds. He is considered one of the most important artists of the 17th century. He worked in Amsterdam for mostly Protestant patrons, usually wealthy merchants who commissioned portraits. 17th century Amsterdam was an economic powerhouse and his paintings were in high demand as luxury items and financial investments. During his lifetime he achieved incredible wealth and success, only to lose it all in his later years. His changes in fortune are documented in his approximately 75 thoughtful self-portraits. Some of his notable works include The Night Watch, 1642, The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolai's Tulip, 1632, and Bathsheba at her bath, 1654.
What is encaustic painting?
Encaustic paints consist of pigment blended with hot wax, such as beeswax. Encaustic was invented in ancient Greece and popular in ancient Rome, especially when painting sculpture, because encaustics provide rich colors and a fair amount of durability. Although encaustic techniques are difficult and labor-intensive, there has been a resurgence in the use of encaustics amongst some 20th century artists. The contemporary artist Jasper Johns is known for uses of encaustic.
What are earthworks?
Earthworks, also known as land art, are works of art made of natural materials such as earth, rocks, water, usually on an extremely large scale. Land art became popular in the 1960s. Earthworks have been linked to minimalism due to their inherent simplicity, and some scholars have called this form a reaction against consumerism because it is nearly impossible for anyone to buy or sell, or exhibit, land art. The most famous example of an earthwork is Spiral Jetty, built on Roselle Point in the Great Salt Lake in Utah in 1970 by artist Robert Smithson. Spiral Jetty is monumental indeed, a 1,500-foot-long embankment made of earth, mud, and basalt rocks that juts into the lake, periodically submerged due to the changing levels of the lake. Earthworks such as Spiral Jetty are built on such a large scale that they evoke the mystery and largesse of ancient monuments and sites such as Cahokia or Serpent Mound. Other examples of earthworks are Michael Heiser's Double Negative, 1969–70, which was created by cutting the sides of a canyon wall in the Arizona desert, as well as Walter de Maria's Lightning Field, 1977.
Who was Zurbaran?
Like Velázquez, Francisco de Zurbarán, 1598–1664, was influenced by Caravaggio and is known for his powerful paintings of saints and martyrs, as well as his highly realistic still lifes. One of Zurbarán's most powerful paintings is Saint Serapion, 1628. Which depicts the deceased saint after he sacrificed himself in exchange for captives held by the Moors. Against an inky black background, the saint's body is illuminated, leaning forward against his restraints. Powerful light reflects off of his long white robes, which look incredibly real. A similar contrast of light and dark is evident in another painting, Agnus Dei, c. 1635–1640, in which a white lamb dominates the picture plane, its feet tied in a suggestion of sacrifice. The simplicity of Zurbarán's images belies moving spiritual connotations and profound visual impact.
Who is Shirin Neshat?
Shirin Neshat, 1957, is an Iranian-American photographer and video artist whose photographs frequently explore stereotypes of Muslim women. Her later video work, including Tuba, 2002, and Logic of the Birds, 2002, explores spiritual themes through Quranic symbolism and music.
How can you recognize a Michelangelo?
The work of Michelangelo has a very particular style, in both painting and sculpture. Michelangelo's David is a good example of this style, which emphasizes physical idealism of the human form, especially the male form. The David is monumental in size at 17 feet tall, and was cut from an 18-foot block of white marble. David is shown at the peak of his youth. He is strong, athletic, nude, and flexing his muscles as he prepares for battle with his enemy, Goliath. His hands and feet are both oversized and highly realistic. The veins and ligaments of the hands are clearly visible even from afar. One knee is slightly bent and the hips tilt to one side, the traditional contrapposto pose, which adds a sense of life and realism to the sculpture. Many of Michelangelo's other works also emphasize physical perfection and include large figures with broad shoulders, flexed muscles, and serious faces.
What is Scarabray?
Scarabray is a seaside Neolithic settlement on the Scottish Orkney Islands, which are situated in the far north of the country. The relatively small Scarabray was inhabited between 3100 and 2600 BCE. thousands of years after Near Eastern settlements such as Jericho and Kittelhuak, and was constructed of stone due to the lack of timber on the islands. Whereas other populations on the British Isles did not settle until nearly the Bronze Age. Evidence of settled life at Skara Brae includes discoveries of cooking tools, decorated pottery, and stone-carved furniture such as beds and dressers. The fact that stone was a primary building material resulted in uniquely well-preserved examples of Neolithic art and architecture in Northern Europe.
Why were Botticelli's paintings burned?
Sandro Botticelli, 1445 to 1510, was a Florentine painter who was quite frequently commissioned by the powerful Medici family, often to produce secular mythological paintings such as The Birth of Venus, 1484 to 86, and Primavera, 1482. Now one of his most famous works. The Birth of Venus depicts the classical goddess of love and beauty as she is being born out of sea foam. She floats to shore atop a large scallop shell, her hair blowing gently around her body, as she covers her nude body in modesty. She is propelled by the breath of the wind god, Zephyr, who holds his lover, Chloris, in his arms. Small, pink flowers float in the air. Venus is welcomed to shore by a follower who reaches out to cover her with a floral garment. This painting, like the rest of Botticelli's work, shows the artist's skill in using single-point perspective and using light to effectively model three-dimensional figures. It is also both erotic and secular. Things changed for Botticelli when a Dominican monk named Fra Girolamo Savonarola took power in Florence from 1494 to 1498. Savonarola gave powerful sermons in which he accused the city of Florence of being morally corrupt and materialistic. Swayed by Savonarola's conservative religious message, Botticelli burned many of his own paintings, especially his earlier more secular works. Botticelli's later work has a decidedly more religious tone.
What is Cufic?
Named after the town of Kufa in Iraq, Cufic is an early form of Arabic script that evolved from a style of inscription used for coins and stone monuments. The Cufic script features large letters as early Qur'ans were often shared by multiple readers, and are characterized by long horizontal lines and thick rounded curves. Cufic was the style of calligraphy used most often until the 12th century.
Who is Bill Viola?
Bill Viola, 1951, is a contemporary video and sound artist known for exploring the role of technology in his work and his video and audio. One of his most well-known and emotionally powerful pieces is Heaven and Earth. 1992, a sculptural installation in which two video monitors face one another. One monitor displays a scene of the artist's mother on her deathbed while the other screen plays a scene of his nearly newborn son, juxtaposing the beginning of life with the end. Because of the highly reflective surface of the screens, the death and birth scenes merge into one. Viola's larger installations can create a completely immersive environment through video and audio projection, making the viewer a part of the art. Viola's 1976 work, He Weeps for You, used video to allow gallery visitors to see and hear themselves reflected in a water droplet that slowly falls from a brass valve. An image that was magnified on a large screen.
What is the per game style?
During the 4th century B.C., Alexander the Great marched Greek culture over nearly half the globe, and when he died suddenly in 323 BCE, his vast empire fell into fragmented city-states and small kingdoms. One such kingdom, Pergamon, was located in present-day Turkey and became a leading city for art during the Hellenistic period. Art from Pergamon is known for being emotionally expressive and emphasizes acts of heroism. An example of the Pergamene style is a sculpture known as Gallic chieftain killing his wife and himself. The sculpture depicts a military victory over the Celtic Gauls in France. It was originally in bronze, and now exists only in Roman copies. The work romanticizes the death of the leader of the Gauls, who commits suicide rather than surrender to the Pergamese. His wife, who he has already stabbed to death, falls limp in his left arm as he turns away and plunges a sword into his own chest. This dramatic sculpture attempts to evoke a feeling of sympathy and admiration for the fallen chief, and is a powerful example of the expressive Pergamese style.
What is a painted screen?
In Japan, painted folding screens, called byabu, were popular in the imperial houses of the elite military rulers of the Momoyama period. While many of these castles and houses no longer exist, 17th century screens made by the Kano family remain. Compared to Western standards, 17th century Japanese houses were very empty, with no furniture or decorative trinkets filling interior spaces. Instead, movable screens were painted in bold colors, often depicting nature, landscapes, and genre scenes. Painted screens by the Kano family include Cypress Tree, an 8-fold work attributed to Kano Itoku, 1543 to 1590, which was originally used as a sliding door. The artist emphasized the texture of the bark of the tree while simplifying the background, which serves to monumentalize the tree and evoke the vastness of nature.
What does Jain art look like?
Jainism is an important religion in India, in addition to Hinduism. Though only a small percentage of Indians are Jainists. Jainists believe in the cycle of death and rebirth, called samsara, and attempt to live pure, ascetic lives by looking inwards, avoiding material possessions, and acting kindly to others. At first glance, it may be difficult to distinguish Jain art from Buddhist and Hindu art. But one of the key types of Jain art is monumental nudes of meditating warriors, known as jinas. The ascetic Gammata in Karnataka, India, is an example of this. At around 60 feet tall, this 10th century, colossal sculpture represents Gammata, who was famous for meditating for years without stopping. The figure of Gammata stands at attention with poised shoulders, confident chin, and stoic face. The sculpture's nudity, along with images of tree branches and creepers that curl around his limbs, are meant to emphasize the jinas' focus on spiritual, rather than material needs. Sculpture such as the ascetic Gammata is used to aid Jainists in their own meditations.
What does it mean if a work of art is representational?
A representational work of art is one that realistically depicts objects from the real world. For example, 17th century Dutch still lifes are representational, as these paintings feature realistic images of everyday objects.
Who was Peter Paul Rubens?
Peter Paul Rubens, 1577 to 1640, was a Flemish painter whose work is characterized by a rich, painterly style and a lively, expressive tone. His paintings are often monumental in size, include deep red colors, a favorite of Rubens, and were sought after by both aristocratic and Catholic patrons. He painted mythological, genre, and Christian subjects. Rubens worked for patrons such as King Charles I of England, the Habsburgs, and the Spanish royal family. Rubens traveled across Europe studying earlier masters and even contemporaries such as Caravaggio. He was highly successful, and was able to build his own grand home and studio in Antwerp. Rubens was a prolific painter. Some of his most famous paintings include The Raising of the Cross, c. 1610, which is a 15-foot tall triptych in the Church of St. Walpurga in Antwerp, as well as Venus and Adonis, c. 1635, and the recently attributed Massacre of the Innocents, c. 1611, which sold for over $70 million at auction in 2002.
What is the Dome of the Rock?
The Dome of the Rock is one of the earliest surviving mosques. Built at the top of Mount Moriah in Jerusalem during the Umayyad period, 661 to 750 C. The location is holy for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, and is thought to be the location of the creation of Adam, the place where Ibrahim, in Arabic, brought his firstborn son to be sacrificed, and the location of both Solomon and Herod's temples. In Islam, the location is also associated with the Prophet Muhammad's physical and spiritual journey to heaven, known as the Isra and Miraj. The Dome of the Rock is the third holiest site for Muslims. After the sacred mosque, Masjid al-Haram, in Mecca, and the Mosque of the Prophet, al-Masjid al-Nabawi, in Medina. The building itself features two large ambulatories that circle 66 exposed rock, which allows enough space for the many pilgrims who visit the shrine. Similar to the structure of a centrally planned church, this circular structure was commonly used in Christian religious architecture in Jerusalem at the time. The center of the building is topped with a large, golden dome supported by inner and outer wooden shells. 16 arched windows, stone piers, and interior columns. The columns, and their capitals, were constructed using recycled material from other classical monuments. The interior and exterior of the Dome of the Rock is covered in highly stylized mosaics, with vegetal and floral designs as well as calligraphic inscriptions. The Dome of the Rock is a powerful monument to Islamic faith, exuding both permanence and elegance.
What is pre-Columbian art?
Pre-Columbian art is a broad term given to the art of Mesoamerica, which includes Mexico and Central America, and South America before the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492. It includes the art of large cultures such as the Maya, Aztecs, and Inca.
What is the ISE shrine?
The Ise Shrine is an important Shinto complex in Japan dedicated to the goddess Amaterasu, ancestor of the Japanese emperors. Known as the Way of the Gods, Shinto may be considered a religion or a philosophy and is indigenous to Japan. Water purification rituals and worship of animistic local deities known as kami are fundamental aspects of Shinto. The Ise complex features a main shrine which has a thatched roof and is raised off the ground with wooden pilings. Made of unpainted cypress wood, the shrine style reflects natural simplicity. Historically, only members of the Japanese imperial family were allowed worship in Ise's interior sanctuary. Every 20 years, the main shrine is completely rebuilt on the site. An important political and religious ritual.
What is minimalism?
Minimalism is a term that describes simple, geometric art that is often impersonal and made with a new set of materials, including aluminum, plexiglass, plywood, and steel. Minimalist artists attempted to distill their work into a pure form, editing any reference to personality, feelings, symbolism, or story. The style became popular during the mid-1960s, though many art critics at the time accused minimalism of being too cold, and questioned whether art could, or should, be produced by industrial means. The term minimalism has been used to describe the art of many artists. From Ad Reinhardt to Yves Klein, Frank Stella to Robert Rauschenberg. The work of artist Donald Judd, 1928 to 1994, is a good example of minimalism. Judd explored the difference between painting and sculpture with his series of wall structures. Judd's wall structures are composed of a series of machinematic rectangular forms that protrude from the wall. Forms that he called specific objects. The work of artist Anne Truitt, 1921 to 2004, occasionally blurred the line between minimalism and color field painting. However, her minimalist sculpture Grant 1963, a long wooden beam, painted in acrylic, was a pure, impersonal, geometric form.
Did samurai culture influence Japanese art?
As samurai culture grew stronger during the Kamakura period, 1185 to 1392, it did indeed have an influence on the arts, including sculpture and painting. One of the most powerful hand-scroll paintings from the 13th century is Night Attack on the Sanjo Palace, which depicts swirling flames in deep orange hues as armored warriors on horseback attack one another in a battle between the Minamoto and Tara clans. The surprise attack was a significant historical event in Japan's military history. And though the hand scroll was painted nearly 100 years after the battle took place, it serves as a historical record of the period.
How did the Bauhaus influence America?
Many important German artists, architects, and designers fled the country during the rise of the Nazis and emigrated to America, where they achieved great success. Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus School, left Nazi Germany in 1934 and joined the faculty at Harvard University, where he founded the Architects Collaborative, a modernist group that emphasized collaboration and created the design for the Clark Art Institute building in Williamstown, Massachusetts. In Chicago, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy directed the new Bauhaus, which lasted until 1938, and later went on to open the School of Design, which was then incorporated into the Illinois Institute of Technology, IIT. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe was head of IIT's architecture department and designed Crown Hall, a masterpiece of modern architecture.
Why did Damien Hirst preserve a tiger shark in formaldehyde solution?
Damien Hirst's preserved shark piece might not mean much without its title: The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, 1991. Hirst, 1965, garnered early critical success as a member of the Young British Artists, and works in a variety of media, making paintings, prints, sculptures, and installations. Hirst's pickled shark, like much of his work, features dead animals, and is thematically focused on death, and the frailty or fragility of human existence. The once fierce and dynamic shark is now frozen, his dangerous teeth preserved in formaldehyde and kept under glass. A living, breathing beast is now as immobile and impersonal as any other example of ready-made pop art. Hirst's preserved shark has been criticized by many as a stunt, and by others who claim Hirst's work shouldn't even be considered art at all. But, Hirst has been very successful overall, both critically and financially, earning millions of dollars for his pieces, as well as the prestigious British Turner Prize for Art in 1995.
What is performance art?
Performance art is slightly more complicated than its name might suggest. Performance art is indeed art that blends music, theatrical performance, and visual art, rather than a single painting or sculpture. But, the form itself, which became more popular in the 1960s, also blurs the line between art and artist, and frequently produces an uncomfortable reaction amongst viewers. For example, the artists Gilbert and George sing for over 8 hours in their performance. The Singing Sculpture, 1969. In a performance piece titled How to Explain Pictures to a Dead Hare, 1968. The often provocative artist Joseph Beuys holds a dead hare in his arms while appearing to whisper to it. A good example of the way in which both art and artist merge is Yoko Ono's 1964 performance Cut Piece, in which audience participants are invited to cut off pieces of Ono's clothing until none remain. This performance is also categorized as an example of Fluxus art.
What are some of the important concepts of postmodernism?
Understanding some of the key terms of postmodernism will help to get a grasp of what it is that postmodern artists do. Pluralism. Postmodern art is not just varied, it is pluralistic, meaning it reflects the perspectives of many different ethnic, racial, religious, gender, and sexual groups. Postmodern art is also pluralistic because it reflects many different artistic styles, and often incorporates features of various art movements from the past and present. Appropriation. Postmodern art often copies or borrows elements and images from other works of art to form something new. Consider contemporary television comedies such as The Simpsons and Family Guy. These shows frequently refer to, or parody, other television shows or elements of popular culture. Familiarity with these references is essential in order to get the joke. Deconstruction. Postmodern deconstruction is a method of taking apart a unified whole to expose its underlying structure. It is used as a form of analysis or interpretation. It is popular amongst postmodern artists who are suspicious of the uniformity and overarching structure of modernism. In this way, postmodernism is like the child who continues to ask why. Kitsch. Many postmodern artists challenge the distinction between good and bad taste. The word kitsch traditionally refers to ugly objects that reflect bad taste, such as souvenirs, or overly sentimental objects. Examples of kitsch include decorative garden gnomes, or plates decorated with the images of the British royal family. Postmodern artists embrace kitsch and frequently incorporate kitsch into their work.
What is a ribbed vault?
Unlike the rounded barrel vaults so closely associated with the Romanesque style, ribbed vaults are more structurally effective than thick walls, allowing cathedrals like Durham to reach new heights, and ushering in the Gothic age. Looking much like the human ribs, a ribbed vault is composed of a fanning framework of piped masonry that supports the weight of the ceiling and walls of a building.
What is acrylic paint?
Acrylics are synthetic paints that have some of the features of oil paint and some features of watercolors. They are water-soluble, but some can be mixed with oil as well. Once acrylic paint dries, it can look quite similar to oil paint. Invented in the 20th century, acrylics are amongst the most popular type of paints used by modern and contemporary artists.
What is pop art?
Pop art began in the 1950s in Britain. The term itself was invented by English art critic Lawrence Alloway, and became one of the most influential art movements of the mid-20th century, particularly in Britain and the United States. Pop artists challenged the status of fine art by relying on mass media images, such as those from advertisements and popular culture, to create artworks. Key pop artists include Alan Jones, 1937, Eduardo Bolazzi, 1924 to 2005, Peter Blake, 1930, and Richard Hamilton, 1922 to 2011, all of whom worked primarily in the UK. American pop artists include Roy Lichtenstein, 1923-2007, Robert Rauschenberg, 1925 to 2008, Jasper Johns, 1930, and most notably, Andy Warhol, 1928 to 1987. Early pop art shows were held in London and New York City, including the This Is Tomorrow show at the Whitechapel Art Gallery and a number of shows at New York's Sydney Janis Gallery. Critics were mixed in their reviews, with many critics shocked at the use of low art to create works of fine art. For example, Robert Rauschenberg, who studied painting under Bauhaus artist Joseph Albers, created a series of works incorporating the Coca-Cola logo and Roy Lichtenstein's large paintings mimicked the look and style of comic book art. Pop art questioned the difference between good and bad taste, and broadened the scope of possible fine art subject matter to include everyday objects and culture.
What is Pacific art?
Pacific art covers the art of cultures in Oceania, Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia. This includes countries such as Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea, and territories such as Easter Island, Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, and the U.S. state of Hawaii. The art of these regions is sometimes referred to as oceanic art. Pacific art forms and subject matter can vary greatly from culture to culture and can include paintings, ritual masks, wood and stone carvings, domestic and monumental architecture, textiles, and body art.
What is neoclassical architecture?
Neoclassical architecture of the 18th century was a powerful reaction against the highly decorative styles of Rococo architecture, and emphasized logic, symmetry, and geometry in its design. Neoclassical architecture was particularly popular in the design of public buildings, and at least in Britain, private country homes.
Did Chinese painting change during the Qing dynasty?
The Qing dynasty was a Manchurian imperial power that ousted the previous Ming rulers and controlled China from 1644 to 1911. For many Chinese, especially Ming loyalists, this political shift was traumatic and frightening. However, although the Manchurians were a foreign power, they adopted many Chinese art traditions favored by the Ming. Multiple schools of painting developed during the Qing era, including the Orthodox school, which drew inspiration from the earlier literati painters, and the Individualist school. Individualist painters focused on expressing their personal feelings during the tumultuous time of the Qing takeover. Leading painters of the era included Shi Tao, 1642 to 1707. An individualist painter who traced his ancestry to the first Ming emperor. When the Qing took over Beijing, he fled and went into hiding, and then became a Chan Buddhist monk. He wrote extensively on art theory, including his most well-known tract, Sayings on Painting from Monk Bittergourd, which espoused the significance of the single brush stroke. His work balances expressive energy with soft tones, and is notable for its tendency toward abstraction and use of negative space to create a sense of depth. Shi Tao was one of the most famous individualist painters because of his innovative manipulations of traditional forms of Chinese painting.
Who was Amelia Pelles?
Amelia Pelles, 1896 to 1968. Was an important Cuban artist whose modernist paintings visually explore Cuban identity. Pelles studied art in both Cuba and Paris, where she was inspired by Cubism and Constructivism. Especially the work of Russian artist Alexandra Ixter. Her paintings are flat and boldly colored, with black outlines, and are reminiscent of the tropical climate of Cuba. During her later career, Pelles worked on ceramics and murals. Examples of her work include Mar Pacifico, Hibiscus, 1943, Nina con Paloma. Girl with a Dove, 1947, and numerous untitled works and sculptures.
What markings distinguish images of the Buddha?
The Buddha is not a god, but an enlightened being who has achieved suprahuman status and has escaped the Buddhist cycle of life and death. The earliest images of the Buddha show the holy figure as a monk wearing long robes and can be identified by certain body attributes called lakshanas. As a boy, the Buddha was wealthy. Therefore, one important body attribute is elongated ears due to years of wearing heavy jewelry. Another important marking is called the urna, a curl of hair between the Buddha's eyebrows, often depicted as a dot. Mudras, or hand gestures, allow images of the Buddha to convey specific messages. For example, if the Buddha is shown with his right hand reaching towards the ground, this represents a call to witness the Buddha's enlightenment and is a mudra known as bhumisparsha, earth touching.
What is a yakshi?
A yakshi, an erotic goddess figure worshipped throughout India, represents fertility and vegetation. These sensual figures are used to decorate the exterior of the Great Stupa in Sanchi, India. The yakshi from Sanchi are partially clothed and are depicted holding onto mango tree branches, encouraging them to bloom. The curving poses of the yakshi were later adopted by Buddhist artists in their depictions of Buddha's mother giving birth.
What is Art Deco?
Art Deco is a term that describes a style of decorative arts popular during the 1920s and 1930s. Though the term was coined later. Art Deco, originally called Style Moderne, began in France and gained prominence after the Exposition Internationale des Arts Décoratifs et Industriels Modernes, an art and design expo held in Paris in 1925. Art Deco is characterized by the merging of fine arts with decorative arts and emphasized new support for the craftsman over the factory. Art Deco objects, illustrations, and buildings are often highly ornamental, something that was criticized by other modernist designers and writers, such as Le Corbusier, who favored a more industrial aesthetic. There are often exotic elements in Art Deco design. Inspired by the discovery of King Tut's tomb in Egypt in 1922. Abstract movements such as Cubism and Futurism also inspired geometric motifs associated with Art Deco.
What is a fresco?
A fresco is a wall painting made using the bone fresco technique of applying pigment to freshly mixed, wet plaster. The process results in durable, permanent images. Another technique, known as fresco secco, is a method of applying pigment to plaster that has already dried. This method results in more fragile images that can flake off over time. Fresco painting is usually done in areas with warm, dry weather, ideal conditions for the bone fresco process. Italian cities such as Florence and Siena are well known for their frescoes.
What was impressive about the doors of Bishop Burn Ward?
The splendidly designed bronze doors of Bishop Burn Ward were built for the Abbey Church of St. Michael's in Hildesheim, Germany. The doors themselves are enormous, over 16 feet tall, and are the first example of monumental bronze sculpture made by the lost wax process since antiquity. Each door was made as one piece, a remarkable technical feat. Considering the complex relief sculpture covering each door, notable for their masterful metal work, the doors are also impressive due to their complex narrative imagery, which outlines both Old and New Testament events. Each door is divided into 8 panels, each representing a specific biblical scene. A design likely inspired from manuscript illumination.
Who was Caravaggio?
Michelangelo Merisi, 1571–1610, better known as Caravaggio, was a complicated artist. He never had a workshop or any apprentices, and seemed more comfortable in the dark alleys of Rome than in the grand churches and palaces of his high-status patrons. Prone to violence, Caravaggio frequently ran into trouble with the law. In 1606, he killed a man in a street fight, prompting the Pope to issue a warrant for his death. He was, however, one of the greatest naturalist painters in history. And his powerfully realistic paintings promoted Christian themes of redemption and salvation. Caravaggio was also a skilled still life painter. One of his most notable still lifes is Basket of Fruit, 1597. Against a yellow background, a wicker basket filled with aging fruits and leaves sits on a window ledge. The purple grapes are starting to turn a moldy gray color. Green leaves are wilting, some are covered in brown spots. A red and yellow apple is browning around two apparent wormholes. The former sheen and health of this fruit is apparent, but only a slight tinge of life remains. The basket of fruit is so close to the picture plane that it is almost confrontational, forcing the viewer to notice the passing of time. The painting has been interpreted as symbolic of the fleetingness of youth and beauty.
What is luminism?
Luminism is a 20th century word used to describe a 19th century American painting style. Characterized by landscapes and nature scenes featuring diffused light effects and invisible brush strokes. Artists associated with the luminist sensibility include George Caleb Bingham, Asher Durand, Martin Johnson Head, and other artists also considered part of the Hudson River School. A good example of the style is Bingham's Fur Traders Descending the Missouri, 1845. A painting filled with luminous mist reflecting off the Missouri River during the early morning. Two figures seated in a canoe, father and son, wear bright clothes that contrast with the color and tone of the hazy trees in the background, while what is thought to be a bear cub sits in the far end of the canoe, casting a dark shadow over the water. Martin Johnson Head's Sunset over the Marshes, c. 1890–1904, is another example of American luminism. The painting depicts a red-tinged sunset over the salt marshes of Massachusetts, with a pointed haystack prominently positioned in the foreground. Luminism was an important part of early American painting as artists attempted to capture the essence of the country's landscapes and exemplifies both romantic and later realist tendencies in 19th century art.
Who was Henri Rousseau?
Henri Rousseau, 1844–1910, was nicknamed Le Douanier, meaning the customs officer, because that was his profession. He was an amateur painter who began painting during middle age. Since he was not academically trained, his style was called naïve. He showed his work at the Paris Salon d'Indépendance and caught the eye of influential artists who helped him to develop his artistic career. By 1858, he was able to devote himself to art full-time. His imaginative, detailed paintings were inspired by 19th century symbolism and psychology, and often feature exotic settings and primal themes. One of his greatest works is The Dream, 1910, which depicts a nude woman reclining on a sofa, a traditional art historical subject who has been strangely transported into a jungle. Wild fruit hangs from trees and exotic animals lurk in the brush while a dark figure plays a flute-like instrument. Due to the complex symbolism of the painting, Rousseau wrote an accompanying poem in an attempt to at least partially explain the work. The most common interpretation of the dream is that it represents a woman sleeping on her couch in Paris. And as she dreams, her mind is transported to the jungle. Therefore, the dreamer has been merged with the dream. And the unexpected combination of elements, rendered with detailed realism, foreshadows surrealism.